Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast with Stefan Whitwell with us today. Stefan is founder and chief investment officer at Whitwell Co. in Austin, Texas. We're going to talk about wealth markets, everything in between, including Jiu-Jitsu, which Steph is an avid practitioner. This podcast is brought to you by podpire.com. That's my podcasting company. If you want to start scale, be invited to pod like this one. I am demonetized into the podcasting world. So if you need help with that, podpire.com. Steph, welcome to the pod. Can you tell me a bit more about yourself and about your company?
Thanks, Charles. It's great to be here. I think my most important job is dad. Got four kids, quite the span from 3-year-old son to 22-year-old daughter. And I shouldn't forget my 1-year-old German Shepherd puppy, very much part of the family. And run a nationwide wealth management firm. We're in 14 states. We invest for clients. We also help clients keep a lot more of what they make through tax planning, which for many years I made the mistake of thinking my CPA was doing until I realized wonderful guy, but he's really a historian, always focused on last year. But planning is all forward looking, right? So when I realized what a huge difference that can make, I really started deep diving in it. And now it's kind of a big passion of mine, along with private investing and financial planning.
What did you learn from your years living in Tokyo?
Boy, a couple random things. One is I learned how wasteful we are with space here in the U.S. I remember when I got an apartment there that was 100 square meters, 1,000 square feet. I thought, man, this is like palatial, huge. And you come back here and we don't use. So it kind of sparked an interest in architecture, and how you can still make small spaces feel big and a lot more useful. I think I also learned that there's some commonality to human spirit that, history and circumstances aside, is just a really beautiful thing. So when I first went there, I lived in a homestay family. Actually, what happened is I was living in a Zen monastery at the time, and I was about to leave, and the guy, the chief operating officer of this training monastery, essentially said, "Where are you going to go?" And I said, "I don't know yet." And he's like, "It's so dumb that you don't have a plan, you don't know where you're going. Like you don't have any money. Like this is really just, you know, bad." And I said, "I have faith. I know something's going to come through." And he, like, every day for like 30 days. So finally, at the end of 30 days, he says, "Come with me." And he took me. He didn't live. He lived at the monastery, but he had a wife and children that lived in a separate home. And unbeknownst to me, he took me to his home for an interview. And he felt bad for me and said, "Man, if I can't talk this," he says, "you should go back to America, get a plan together, get some money together, and then come back to Japan." I said, "No, it's my only opportunity." I said, "When I go back, I'm gonna have all this college debt. I got to get a job. I can't just come back." And so he began to admire my commitment, but he really tried to talk me going back. And so when he finally realized he couldn't talk me into going back to America, he felt like he needed to help me. So he takes me back. I interview with the family, unbeknownst to me. We all get along. And then on the day that I'm like walking out into the world again, about to figure out what I'm going to do next, he essentially says, "Hey, you can go live with my family." And the trade there was, "Hey, we'll feed you, but you got to do work around the house, clean stuff, build stuff, whatever." And I said, "Great." And it was really an amazing experience. And it was very courageous because at the time it was just his wife and his daughter, and they were inviting this foreigner who they didn't really know super well to live in the same home. And so it was funny in the beginning. You'd have all these like old, what do you call obasan, grandmothers in the neighborhood coming by every day to check, "Are you still okay? Even those foreigners living there, are you still okay?" But so one day I'm looking at a piece of art in the Genkan, the kind of entryway into their home, and on the surface of it, it's this party scene. And I asked him about it, and it turns out this is kind of the punchline of the story, but it turns out that both Mr. and Mrs. Kaneko lost siblings in World War II, male siblings who went to be kamikaze pilots. And that party scene was a old picture drawing of somebody portraying the farewell party to their loved sons in the community who were leaving to fly these airplanes and never return, which is about the most sad thing you can possibly imagine as a parent. And despite that, and having lost family, here they were opening their home to me in an act of just tremendous love and openness and trust, and it was very, very humbling, and things that we shared, just get to know each other. You realize that for all our differences, there's also a lot of kind of human commonality that to this day I really treasure.
And then the money days, Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse in Japan, that was the start, quote unquote, of your career, and possibly the osmosis of you knowing that you could make really decent money in finance.
It was such an amazing place to be. Goldman at the time was still a very intimate, warm partnership and a tremendous culture. I worked at two very different firms. One was Goldman, which was known for its warm, tight culture, genuine teamwork. And then I also have worked at Credit Suisse First Boston, where it was every desk fighting with each other. It was like internecine warfare, every desk trying to fight against other businesses for capital allocation, and brilliant people, but very different culture. And Goldman was amazing. It was really, I'm glad that I had that experience to really see genuine warmth and teamwork at play. And it was also fun just being young and dealing with a lot of commas and zeros, and learning about the markets. And we had all sorts of disasters, as you always do over a period of time. The Russian devaluation, the Thai baht devaluation, the long-term capital management blowing up. Funny anecdote about long-term. I was the junior guy on the desk, and I remember wanting to meet some people over there, and they essentially kind of gave me the cold shoulder. You weren't important enough. And you knew they were in trouble when one day, obviously we knew from the newspapers they were upside down. But one day, a senior guy who would previously not even meet with me is calling me to see if I wanted to buy their office furniture. And I thought that was a really funny moment of irony.
So you've witnessed many crises. You've started your own business after the 2008 drama, or a little bit. What did you learn during that key and very challenging moment of history that was 2008?
For me, it was 2008, 2009, 2010. I had been in a number of real estate investments that were suddenly upside down because banks would not refinance them. They wouldn't refinance deals that they would beg you to refinance, months earlier. And for me, it was really two things. One, a deep realization that all these Harvard case studies and all these things that you learn in school are insightful in a certain degree, but then there's real world experiences where I was observing banks and markets seek equilibrium through behavior that was completely irrational. And that was a very sobering, disturbing, but enlightening experience. And difficult for me to process at first, to be honest. The second is I lost a lot of money in that time period. And, I went from being kind of king of the hill to losing almost everything. And you learn a lot about yourself in a time like that, but you also you learn a lot about other people. And I feel that insight, both into myself and other people, is something that is really powerful now, a very important thing to understand, and can be very, very can make a huge difference in almost any other context. And I wish I could have learned it differently. I don't know if I could have. It was a very difficult time, but you realize that it's just money. You can always make more money, but what you can't buy is integrity. What you can't buy are true friendships. And it also taught me about a whole different side of the economy, the distressed investment side. And going through that on the wrong side of the table, I vowed to myself, next time I'm going to learn about this and master it so that next time we see this in the economy, I can really take advantage of it, both personally and for my clients. And although not wishing it on the U.S. economy, we're kind of there now, seeing more opportunities like that emerge. And except this time I'm on the right side of the table.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna get to this, but yeah, the next now is now literally COVID. The economy was really slow this year. So what have you observed this year, and how were you on the right side that time? Did you start planning ahead, or did you start reacting really quick when the shit hit the fan?
So I think it's two things. The first is mindset. So as an example, right now, there's a tremendous banking crisis unfolding in the United States, arguably around the world, but definitely here. It's not in the news because they don't want it in the news. They don't want people to freak out and have bank runs. It makes it a lot more complicated to manage. I get that, but it's nonetheless happening. And to a lot of people, that's very unsettling and that's scary. And they end up settling in a bucket of they kind of settle in a place of fear. And the first thing that I try to give those around me is, having gone through that, this is opportunity. There are tremendous opportunities when these things unfold. And so it's not that I can predict when the next, market disruption is going to happen, because I can't. I have opinions, and maybe some of them are more informative than others, but nobody's crystal ball is perfect, and mine included. But what I do have the confidence to do is to know how to react, both mindset, but also kind of financially. And one of the areas where we've been able to take advantage of that is in the private credit markets. So that's really just investing in funds that are providing loans to companies and individuals that are not being provided properly by the banking sector today, because the banking sector is risk averse. Nobody wants to take the risk, say no to everything. Not even about interest rates. It's just they're not willing to say yes. And so that creates a lot of opportunity in the private credit space. And yes, the returns are good, but a more subtle opportunity is the fact that when there are those supply-demand imbalances, as a lender, you can also demand more protections. And I think that even more so than maybe a slightly higher return, the opportunity is to be able to further protect your capital by asking for protections that, when money's free and being thrown around by everybody, you're not going to get people to agree to. So, and that is a very helpful area for people that are wanting cash flow. It could be a business owner that sold his business. He just wants a steady source of cash flow. He'd rather spend money that's coming in than spend off his savings. Totally understandable. It could be somebody that's in their later years that just wants that cash flow. So private credit is a very dynamic space today, and I think going to continue to be dynamic for a while. Just as one specific example. But there are also, I think, as the crisis unfolds and there's more dislocations, the other area are more kind of a growth-oriented strategies where people are buying dollars for pennies from distressed sellers.
And then once you make a boatload of money, I think people shouldn't rejoice yet. I think they should seek out a great tax lawyer, because the government's going to want a piece of that before you buy that Ferrari. Where do you suggest people to look at in the US? Me, in my case, I'm looking at the international scene. Since day one, I incorporated my business a decade ago in Hong Kong. Awesome. Where should people look nowadays to save on taxes, especially if they don't live in a country that they don't necessarily agree with. Because yeah, if you live in a society, you need to pay taxes. If you use the bridge, then pay for the bridge. But yeah, where should people look at? And especially with digital nomads like myself, quote unquote.
That's really interesting because I think that, some of the answers are different if you're American versus non-American. I think if you're American, you're subject to, a really complicated set of rules. If you're not American, I think there's great ways to invest in the U.S. that, without giving up your freedom of kind of your international nexus. But I think that, when it comes to investing, just my own personal take, I think that it's definitely a balance between tax efficiency and also just, absolute level of return. And I think that if you look at a chart of the last 100 years of the U.S. top marginal tax rate, one of the horrifying things that you'll find is there were 10 years where the top marginal tax rate in the U.S. was 90%. I mean, it blew my mind when I discovered this. I'm like, what? Really? Here? I thought we were capitalist. How can you have a 90%? But as long as rates are low, I think the bigger, which historically speaking, they still are in the US. I think the bigger task should really be reserved for what do I want to invest in, and with returns in mind, but also something that gets overlooked is liquidity. And you see that in people in real estate all the time. People that are worth a ton of money on paper, but they are cash poor. And I think that one of the smart things to do is to make sure that you have, at any given time, a fair amount of liquidity independent of longer term held assets. That liquidity does two things for you. One, it gives you a sense of peace of mind, but it also gives you the ability to be agile. So if you find an interesting investment in the US or in Switzerland or in Czechoslovakia or wherever, you can jump on that. And there's real optionality in having some liquidity, especially in weird times like this when things kind of get crazy, because you will run into forced sellers who will sell at ridiculously discounted prices. And if you have liquidity, you can be in a position to really take advantage of that. It takes a little more patience, but then again, patience is part of the game, right?
One of your favorite book is Extreme Ownership. You're also a student of Jiu-Jitsu. What do you have to say about discipline and its causal effect with success?
It's training. One of my favorite quotes was talking with Jean-Jacques Machado, extraordinary warrior and phenomenally talented. And he describes himself so humbly as simply a white belt who never gave up. And to me, that is just so moving. And when you hear him describe his first days of training, his brothers are beating up on him. He's like, I'm just trying to survive, right? And indeed, I think one of the greatest lessons of jiu-jitsu that you learn in that first year is just that. When some guy's on top of you, smashing you, and you feel like you're suffocating, how do I just breathe until the buzzer goes off and this guy gets off me, because sometimes in life, we're in that position, it could be psychological, it could be life circumstances, but we just feel the unbearable pressure of life on us. And training ourselves to learn how to just breathe through that, I think is so powerful. The other thing that really is powerful for me about jiu-jitsu is sometimes, you get stuck in these positions and you go to your professor afterwards, you say, hey, I was stuck in this position, I couldn't do anything. And invariably, particularly if it's a good teacher and they give you a technique-based answer, so not strength, not speed, not size, but technique, it just blows your mind. You're like, oh my gosh, the answer was right there. It was just an unintuitive movement or moving in exactly the opposite direction that my first gut instinct thought I needed to pull or push. And it's really that, again, that kind of awareness that the answer might be there right in front of your face. You just got to be alert to it. You got to be willing to try some things differently. If turning to the right isn't working, try turning to the left, because it's right there, and it's never about strength. It's never about speed. And so I feel like those are great life lessons for any kind of challenge we have in life. And life always throws curveballs, right? I mean, this is part of living, is different curveballs at different times in different ways. And it's inspired me to just stay calm when we're facing kind of a moment of crisis. And then it also reminds me, again, it comes back to mindset, that somewhere right around you is the answer. Somewhere is an opportunity, but you've got to be ready for that. And that's the thing about waiting. When somebody's on top of you, just crushing you, at some point, they're going to move an arm or a leg to begin an attack or to move. And when they do, that creates an opening. And that opening is there for you to take advantage of if you are ready and waiting and observant. Otherwise, it's going to come and go, and you've missed it, and they'll be in a new position crushing you. So it's, how do I stay observant to the opportunities despite dealing with that kind of life pressure, whatever that is.
Right. Your dad.
And they don't teach us that in school, right? Right? They don't. I mean, we learn all this
don't.
other stuff in school, but I mean, I feel like that is one of the things that we all could benefit from.
Right. Talking about teaching, I believe your dad was a teacher, right?
He was. He taught conducting and classical music for 40 plus years.
And founded Whitwell Books. And you're there in that business with him. Tell us about that business, how it came about, and how it came as a passion for you, because I see you also read a bunch of books.
Yeah, it's true. I love reading. They say that mother is or they say need is the mother of invention, or something like that, right? Well, my dad, growing up, he didn't make a ton of money as a professor, and we lived in Los Angeles, and, he needed more money. And he wrote a couple books. He's now written 60 books, but he wrote a couple books, and he would go to the local Xerox store, have them bound, and then he would, send out kind of letters to all the university libraries and say, hey, you need to buy it. And he started this kind of home book publishing business. And, I was super young. And so my job was to like stuff the letters in the envelopes and lick the envelopes and stick on a stamp kind of thing. And it was amazing because it took off. It enabled our family to kind of get through that time period. But it really was my first exposure to building a business. And I loved the fact that even though my dad worked long hours, he was always at home. He was always around, always there. I could always go talk to him and ask him a question. And he didn't mind being interrupted, so to speak. I could always just go talk to him. He'd be happy to talk. And then when we're done talking, he'd go back to working. And I loved having him there. And I have no doubt that planted the seed in my mind that that is another path in life, not just being, that being an employee was the only path. So I remain grateful to this day.
There you go. Well, thank you for the interview, Steph. Where can people find out more about you?
Check us out on the web. We're at whitwelladvisors.com. Or you can shoot me an email, Stefan@whitwelladvisors.com.